we're going to just turn the time over to Nathan, and he is going to walk us through this. It's all yours, Nathan.
Awesome. Cool. Hey, everybody. I know none of you, but that's okay. We can still be friends through Zoom. I want to say the last time I did this, I had a little like photo presentation that went through like some of my philosophy on photo editing and this, that, and the other. But I've come to the conclusion that I don't need to share that. My personal belief is that photos should be edited to get the max out of their potential. And that's what I run by now. And that's what I tell anybody who comes by my art booth and asks me, like, oh, are these photos edited? And I say, darn right they are. They should be, because a good photo should be edited. So that's my philosophy on how I edit things and why I edit things. And oh, hey, Jason, can you make it so I can actually share the screen? Because it says host disabled participants from sharing the screen. So if you can make me either the host or make it so I can do that, would be great. Okay, cool, perfect. Now, perfect. Can you guys see my screen? A head nod or people say yes. Okay. So, I have generally run by that philosophy about editing, and I guess to do a little bit about me, I am a photographer in Southern Utah. I do this kind of full time, and so I actively sell at art shows and those type of events. So I just did the St. George Art Festival here, whatever, a week and a half ago. And I've done shows up in Northern Utah. I've done shows all across Utah, generally speaking. I don't normally do out of state. We'll see if that changes in the near future. And so, yeah, so I'm going to walk through editing a photo today. And this photo will be a good example of a lot of complicated stuff on a fairly, what looks like should be a fairly basic photo. And so I'm going to kind of talk about some of my philosophy leading into the way I did this. Let me see if I can get this out of the way. And so I'm going to talk a little bit of my exposure settings that went into this photo and some of the things I do in order to get the most out of my images. So let's say just zoom down over here at the very bottom across my feed. I have the different exposures. So what I did for this image, I did a focus stack and an exposure blend. So that's what's going to happen tonight. And by the way, if anyone has questions, please interrupt and stop me. I'm not one to sit here and chit chat the entire time and have you guys listen to me like a college professor and not take questions or something. If I go over a topic that you say, hey, stop and do that again so I can see it, or, you know, I'd say something that's confusing, please, you know, speak up and say something. I have no problem stopping. So how I did this photo, I first focused here on my little cholla cactus, and I did a 3 exposure bracket, one in the middle tone, one for low down so I can get the sky really nicely, and I did one kind of overexposed. And so I can work with this overexposed shot, but I usually don't. I usually start somewhere in this middle ground. And so I have, this image is going to be the base of most of my photo. And then I have the different focus points that I focus. So here's the cholla, here's the Joshua tree right here in the background. And then right here is the mountain. And so I have the 3 different focuses throughout the entire image, 1, 2, 3, each with 3 different exposures. I will not use all 9 images. I will probably only use 4, but I automate my system. I just set up the camera to do the 3 different exposures, and I do that through all 3 of them, and I just bring it all in there because it's easier to do that than it is for me to try to go through and selectively, you know, fiddle around with all of it. So the first thing I always start with, I personally hate the enable profile correction. I don't like the idea because it's going to stretch pixels and make up pixels and get rid of pixels and get rid of information. and I took the photo the way I liked it. And so I personally get rid of the enable profile correction here in Lightroom. And then I start. So then I come up here. I usually switch everything to Adobe Landscape, makes my life easy. And then I edit. So primarily what I'm going to be doing is just fiddling around with your basic, sliders and trying to get as much of it within range as possible. So bring up my shadows. Quick photo edit, and I'm now to a fairly good basic starting point within the image. If you're curious to why I'm actually editing on a white background, I actually do all my photos for print. And if you edit on a white background, it will always trick your brain into editing brighter than you initially would on something like black. And so you start and do everything editing on a white background, because when you end up printing it, your photos will be brighter and more colorful. So that is a very good little piece of information to go through. If you're ever planning on printing your images, always edit on a white background.
Is using a white background a disadvantage if you're mostly showing on a screen?
No, because the other people who are going to be looking at your image, the photo will look brighter for them too on their screens, no matter where they see it at. So no, I don't think there's any disadvantage, and if there is one, I don't care, because the people on the screen are usually the least of my concern. It's the people who buy the print in person that really matters in the long run to me. So I always edit on that white background. So I'm going to do a few more little tweaks here and there to get this kind of where I want it. And this is a pretty good base for all the image. And heck, I could probably, if I wanted to, go like this on a masking layer and do something like a linear gradient, and draw a linear gradient over the upper top. And so this is a masking layer that you can do in Lightroom fairly easily. And I can probably tune down the exposure. I can probably get this image fairly well in a single exposure if I really wanted to. And but I'm not going to do that for editing's sake today. So let's say, but I actually will leave this on here because it might make my job a little bit easier. But let me go back to it and click on this and tone it up so it's not so dramatic. Actually, let me just get rid of it. That'll make my life easier for doing the exposure blend later on. Okay. So now I have a good base layer. This will count for 75% of my photo. All the ground will work with this. And now let's go look at the sky. So remember here, this sky image that I now just clicked on, this is actually not going to be the final sky image I work with. The reason why is because this is focused, remember, for this cactus right up front. The actual in focus sky shot is down the line over here. But I edited over here just for convenience sake. I don't actually have to if I don't want to. In fact, if I want, I can go like this and I can hop over to this sky. So this is my final sky I'm going to use for this. Once again, I'm going to remove my profile correction. I'm going to go back and I'm going to switch this back over to Adobe Landscape. I'm not fiddling around with color temperature or anything like that right now. So now I have a sky layer. And what I'm going to do a little bit different with my sky layer here is I'm going to zoom in, and you can, I don't know if you can see on your guys' screen, there's a lot of noise up here. Usually your skies, when you do your one bracket shot below, one stop below, you get a lot of noise in the sky. What you can do to help reduce that, you can go like here and click on the masking and hold down the Alt key, and then you slide it, and then it's going to show you what it's selecting now. And it's going to reduce some of the noise just by adjusting where you sharpen. And then since this is going to be primarily my sky layer, I can fiddle around with the sharpening and do the noise reduction here. And I can get a fairly smooth sky using my noise reduction here. and I can live with that without worrying about the ground. So now I have a sky layer, I have a ground layer, and if my ground layer, I'm going to zoom in. I am going to do a little bit of sharpening, zooming in here. Okay, so now I have a ground layer, but I now need to apply that to these other photos. So I'm going to have my photo I want to start with, and then I'm going to go through and select the other images that are a part of my ground layer. So these are the 3 images. Remember, I did a 3 exposure bracket for each one, so I've skipped every other one. This is my dark, this is my overexposed, back to my neutral, dark, overexposed, neutral, dark, overexposed. And so then I'm going to right click on this first one. I'm going to do develop settings and synchronize settings. And then since I don't have any masks, it says no masking, you synchronize. So now I don't have to go through and individually edit these other images because now they've been lined up with the exact same settings as this first one. So when it comes to the end of actually blending these together, focus stacking, I did 95% of the work right there. And then I have my sky layer as well. So my bottom ground layer, which is going to be my background here, and my sky, which is connected to it. That's all I try to use for my, when I'm editing for my sky image here. I try to use the sky that was taken at the exact same time as my most distant focus point, because when it comes to exposure blending, when you're trying to blend in a sky that has clouds at slightly different spots, you'll get ghosting effects. And I'm trying to avoid all of those as much as possible. And so I use the ground exposure with the same bracketed exposure that my sky came from as my most distant ground. So that's why here. So I end up will be using 1, 2, 3, 4 images for this final image. Okay. So we're going to now talk about something that Jason mentioned when it comes to editing, primarily within Photoshop, and that's the Adobe Camera Raw. So we're going to hop over here. We're going to select our 3 images, our 4 images, and we right click, and now we're going to bring it over into Photoshop. And so one of the things you go to this edit in, there's 2 ways you can do this. You can open as layers in Photoshop, or you can open a smart object in Photoshop. When you're exposure blending alone, opening up a smart object is the smarter way to do it. When you're doing focus stacking and exposure blending, just save yourself time and do open in layers. It will not work in the long run, and I can show you why. So let's start with this smart object Photoshop. So Photoshop's going to pop up here in a second. Mind you, I'm going to have to change screens. Let me pull up this, get this back into full screen mode here.
You ever have a problem of accidentally selecting the wrong picture out of your film strip, since you've got so many different ones that are similar?
Yeah, but I try to, if you make the mistake, you just go back and open up a different one and go and do it again. So
I assume if you tagged them in some way, then you could put a filter to only have the ones that you wanted there.
Probably, but I don't, it's not enough of an issue for me to care. Does anyone have any questions about what I've done so far? That's a fairly basic version of an edit before you do anything more complicated. Does anyone have any questions right now before I go further? Okay, so it looks like no one, everyone's still seeing my Lightroom, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Right now it's loading up all the different layers in Photoshop, and so nothing really exciting happening on my end. Let me go back here and do a new, let me change this when I'm on. So let's do a new share, and now let's hop over to Photoshop. Share. Okay, so can everyone see Photoshop?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So when you open up a smart object, you get 4 different images in Photoshop on different tabs. So that is the why you open up a smart object, because now, and this goes back to what I commented towards you earlier, Jason, if you are curious and you feel like you need to do a little bit more work here on this image, you can double click on the smart object over here on your layers panel, and it'll open it up in Adobe Camera Raw with all the original edits that you made in Lightroom. So you can see over here, and then you can adjust something and, let me up my contrast or my exposure by, just a little bit, let me change my contrast by 3. You push OK. And now it's going to add that edit back to your image that you just worked on in Lightroom. So now you have a raw file that's connected to your Lightroom file. And so if you realize you made a mistake somewhere along the line, when you do things in camera, or you do things in Lightroom and open it up as a smart object in Photoshop, it saves yourself a lot of effort and needing to go back through it. If you made a mistake in your earlier work, you can go back to it and change it there and come back here to Photoshop and then, do some additional editing. This was something I came to later in my life, and it's a huge time saver.
Could you show again how you got to the Camera Raw dialog box?
So right now I have, if you go over here and look at my layers on my right side, you can see that this has this little tiny tag right there. If I right click on it, it'll whatever. So you highlight over it, it should say smart object. And so this is a smart object right now. And so if I want to, I can rasterize it and make it not a smart object. Smart objects have a couple of advantages. If you adjust the size of this image up and down, forward, around, and screw around with it, smart object will not, when you finish your edit, it will not throw away the information. It will hold on to your information that's hidden. And so when you open up a photo from Lightroom into Photoshop as a smart object, it will contain all the information that the photo originally had, and you can access it more specifically, and that's the deal that you get out of that. But now we have 4 different tabs, and the photos are not together. So we got to do that. So let's have this one be my base area, and we go over here and we grab our layer, drag it over to the one we want to. We hold Shift and let go, and it will place it exactly in the middle. And I do that again, Shift, place exactly in the middle, do that again, Shift. So now we have all the layers together, and if we want to, we can go through and edit. You're like, oh crap, my sky could look a little bit better. Let me brighten that up. So let me double click on here. I can now come up over here, and I can, change my exposure just a little bit, brighten this up a little bit, increase my contrast up here, drop my highlights a little bit more, make my brights a little bit brighter, my darks a little darker, and, I can edit that image, and then boom, is now adjusted. So why this doesn't always work and why doing what I'm doing today kind of sucks when you're doing exposure blending and focus stacking. See if the computer is thinking here. Seems to be struggling for a moment. My Photoshop decided to freeze up, so we'll see if it comes back to life here. You can't actually do the built-in Photoshop settings or systems that allow for focus stacking while things are smart objects. It will not let you do it. And so you have to actually change these layers back to regular layers. And once you do that, you can do the things I'm about to do. But I'm apparently letting Lightroom, go through its little thinking process here. I need to get a quick drink of water. Apparently I'm thirsty and I'm doing a lot of talking. So let me, I'm going to put myself on mute real quick. If you guys have any questions, think of some questions while I go grab myself a cup of water, and I will be right back, and I'll let my computer think while I'm doing this too. So give me just a minute. Okay, I'm back. Does anybody have any questions about anything I've talked about so far? Okay, perfect. Let me get rid of these extra layers because I don't actually need them anymore. So I have everything here in one file now. I don't need all of these additional layers. So in order to do a focus stack, we need to have all the different files to be, or all the different layers to be the exact same spot. As you notice, as I go through my different things, you see how there's this focus breathing. You get this slight shift in everything. We have to overcome that. So we're going to go through and we're going to select all of our different layers. We're going to come up here to edit. And normally you do auto align layers, but you see here it's grayed out. So the reason why it's grayed out is because these are smart objects, and smart objects will not allow you to do some of these functions here. So in order to get around that, you got to go through and where's my rasterize layer? You go through rasterize layer, rasterize layer, rasterize layer. Now the image is no longer linked directly to your Lightroom. So you can no longer go through and make edits to your image here and have it connect over to your Lightroom. So that is your one disadvantage when you're working with straight layers. So, is someone about to say something? Okay, so now I have all my layers selected over here on the far right. We're going to come up here back to edit, image, auto align layer. I just use the auto. You can do some other things for doing other various types. You just push OK. Photoshop is now going to think, auto aligning layers. And now when I click through, you can see that the only thing that's really moving now are the clouds. And so now when I want to get everything in the same sharpness together throughout the whole image, it's much, much easier. Okay. So let's do, there's two ways to focus stack in Photoshop. There's the rich man's way, where you let Photoshop do it for you, where you do auto blend layers and you do stack image and push OK. It'll go through and it'll think about it and think about it and think about it. But if you guys here, I can pose a question back to you guys. Why do you think this is not always the best way to do things? I'll pose that and I'll see if anyone has any thoughts or experience why this is not the best way to do it.
Seems to me that would be a good way if it's a very static image where nothing's changed at all. But if something's changing in the background, it may not work right.
Part of it. What else?
Well, to me, editing's always very selective, so it may not pick what exactly I want it to do.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely probably the thing that's more likely that's going to happen here. So we can go through and actually see what it does and selects. So if you look over here on the right, if you're not familiar with Photoshop, let me do a quick 101 to the world of Photoshop. So Photoshop is built around this idea of layers. And so you have different layers that you can then select and manipulate and edit on and work on. And one of the ways in which you get layers to show to one another is through things called masking. Masking over here, I can push Alt here, click on this. So this is what would be a mask. A mask makes it so you can see anything that's white and you can't see anything that's black. This is the whole white reveals, black conceals. And when you're looking at this image here, Photoshop selected on this very background layer, the sky, but as you can tell, let me click off of this. It was selecting, it didn't select all the background here. It selected, bits and pieces of the background. Certain images it does a really good job with, others not so much. But along the way, it selected, odd dots around here, this little dot over there, that little dot right there. And so Photoshop has a tendency to when you do the auto blend layer, if the photo has really big, strong, dynamic differences in focuses, Photoshop does a really good job of picking the sharp ones and the not sharp ones. But when you are doing something like this, that's like F16, this image that was taken at F16, the difference between sharpness between here and here is not a lot. And Photoshop has a tendency to select all sorts of random crap all over the place. So this is a quick and easy, dirty way to do things. If it works, cool, you don't have to do anything else. But if it doesn't, and I don't like the way this works, you have to do it manually. And now we got to hop back all the way over here. So now we got to do this manually. So the way I do this manually, you have your bottom layer. Your bottom layer, the way I always align my images, bottom layer is things closest to you, top layer is everything far away. And if you just keep your system like that and keep that mindset always functioning where the things at the very bottom should be the closest on the very bottom of the image, things closest to you, things that are far away should be the farthest away from you at the very top. It will make your life much easier. If you jumble it around, it is way more difficult. Don't do that mistake. I did that earlier on in my days of doing this, and I regretted it thoroughly. So now we're going to introduce everybody to masks. So right over here on the bottom right side is this little tiny, whatever, white square with a black dot in the center. That's our mask. And so when you are doing this, you first click the mask. A mask always comes in as white. And then I do Control I. That inverts it. So now the mask is black. So you create a mask, Control I, and now we have a black mask. And we can now begin to paint in the things that we want. So in order to do this, we're going to zoom in nice and close and personal. And we know all of this is in sharp focus. What we can do, let me disable that mask. And I can see where this one looks better. Let me zoom in here on this tree, because this should be focused primarily on the tree. And so if I click on, not much of a difference. So, which is fine. But I can still do a little bit of exposure or blending with this. And so what I'm going to do is go over to my paintbrush, click over here. And when it comes to doing focus blending, I take my paintbrush and I paint all the areas I think it'll matter. And so now, and I have my paintbrush set opacity of 100. And now I'm going to start pulling out the Wacom tablet. If you don't own a Wacom tablet, I highly recommend them now. At first, I didn't think they were all that cool. Now I totally believe in them and am a walk-up tablet junkie. Okay, and now we do some of this fine tuning. Certain images, it's a lot more dramatic. This one, you probably can't see much. If you see, you'll see a slight shift within the image. That won't show up to really anyone's visual eye unless they are a photo expert who knows exactly what they're looking for in any way, shape, and form. Okay, while I'm doing this, does anyone have any questions right now? Have I lost anybody? We have a quiet bunch tonight. Okay, let's see what this looks like. Nope, okay, we're good here. I don't need to worry about that. Okay, well, like I said, I'm gonna have my background layer here. We're gonna put a mask, invert that. So you can see here, this one's actually out of focus.
I do have a question.
Okay, go for it.
Is there any way, like when you're creating your mask and selecting certain parts but not others, that you can visually see like what you've selected and what you haven't? Like in Lightroom, for example, there's that red overlay that can let you visualize what's part of your mask and what isn't.
You take Alt and click on the mask, and anything that's white is revealed, black is not. And so right now it's pretty vague. Let me do something I can show you a lot more advanced detail. Cozy. Okay, let me paint in this back mountain here, and then let's get to that side of what I do. So that is going to be the next big hurdle when it comes to fine-tuning selection. And the answer is yes. I had a teacher in college who, when it came to talking about Photoshop, there's like 10 ways to skin a cat for everything. Not every single aspect is there one clear, direct, proper answer. Sometimes there are a few different ways you can do stuff, and you can get similar results. I can probably actually do this with my trees because I'm going to want my trees to match the sky as much as I possibly can. Okay, now let's get into the real fun stuff. And actually what I've come to realize what I really enjoy in Photoshop and what you can really do with Photoshop. Okay, so now I have a photo that is a focus stack from front to back. I have everything in focus throughout the entire thing. If I was doing this for a final edit, I would be a little bit more nitpicky, and I would go through this and a lot more fine-tooth comb brush and make sure nothing's out of focus throughout the entire thing, but it's not going to be worth my time. So now let's get to the fun things. Let's bring in the sky. So there's two ways you could do this. We can go like this, select on the layer, and go select sky. Photoshop does a pretty good job at this now. It didn't used to, but you can see here it pulled in and it's selected. So this is the marching ants. This is one way that you can see where things are selected. The marching ants will show up around, and it shows that it's selected pretty darn well. And I can click the mask and we can see how well it did. It's not perfect. So it didn't select right here between these little things, but it's pretty darn good. And it's a good place to start. So that took care of 90% of my work. But now we have all this stuff right here. So now we're getting into what we call luminosity masking. How many here have heard of or worked with luminosity masking? Because this is the hardest part of what I'm going to talk about today. And if you're not familiar with this, this is going to throw you through a loop. So speak up now if you've never heard this. If you have, then I will be easy. But if you've never heard it before, I'm going to go real slow through this.
Which luminosity mask plugin are you using?
I'm using TK.
Okay.
Tony Kuiper.
Yep.
I've used other ones. If you want to, you can use the free one. I used that one for years. I decided this year I was going to splurge, support the guy, and I bought the TK7 panel.
I've never heard of luminosity masking. Just
Okay, perfect. So let's walk through this. So if you've never heard of luminosity masking, a photo is broken down into luminosity. So let's look over here on the histogram here. Let's kind of make this bigger. Come on. I'm gonna select it. So right over here is my luminosity. The far left side of this over here is going to be my blacks and shadows, midtones, highlights. So this is all kind of your midtone area. So most of this photo is midtone with a good section in the shadows working its way to black. And then over here is going to be my highlights. And I actually don't have a ton of highlights, and I have nothing that's overexposed. So this is actually how a photo is drawn out in just light scale. The best way to visualize this is to go back here and let me just convert this to black and white. So now this is images in black and white. I just did a quick conversion. We're not going to keep it here. And so now the image is in black and white. So now we can look at this and we can see that there are very bright things here and then there are very dark things here. And a luminosity mask goes through and it learns how to select the very brightest things or the very darkest things, and you get to choose what it selects. So when we open up our little Tony Kuiper panel here, we have the lights over here, we have the darks over here. If I want to, I can select just the very brightest of brights, which is my number 6. And when you do that, it'll sit there and calculate and think for a second. And it says, hey, you don't have really anything that's in the brightest of brights, but let's go over here and I'm going to step down and you can start seeing how different things start getting added back in. These are my bright things within my image. And so I go through at each one of these steps. And if I go for example, this one, my cloud's bright, my sky's usually bright. But if you also look right here, let me zoom in here. Do I have any extra programs running around in the background I can kill that can open up some RAM here? Okay. Once my computer decides to think and zoom in. It doesn't like doing this with so many different things up sometimes. So sometimes you just got to kill some programs and then it'll start working a little bit better. Okay. Okay, let me zoom back in. Zoom, zoom, zoom. Okay, so let me go back over here, click on this, and if we look and notice on the tree, we have a lot of area selected in between. That is all the sky, while the tree is mostly dark. And particularly what's nice with this, with the more advanced version, right now the program is selecting anything that's white. And so I can adjust where it selects with this little slider. And so I can really start fine tuning it, and where it's now really selecting primarily between the branches here, and I can start really focusing in on the light between these little spines. And so that's what really makes this nice sometimes, is I can go like that, and I go, in order to get that, what my selection is, I go to channels, and I go to my modified rapid mask here. And so what I've done now, I can now click on this, and I can push control and click on this channel. And so I'm going to repeat that again. So if you're over here, you're in layers, you go to channels, you go find your adjusted layer, you select it, and then push control and then select again. Now this is selected all the things. So you have your little marching ants, and you can come back over here, and this is all the things that are selected. But I don't want to see all this irritating marching ant stuff. So you do Control H, they're gone now. And so now you can just focus in on editing around these little spines. I'm a little too zoomed in now, but that's okay. So now I'm going to go in. I have my paintbrush. I'm on my layer that I want. I'm using white because that's my select and reveal. But now I need to drop my opacity because if I do it at 100%, anything that's off will stand out. And so now I can go through. Whoa, what just happened? Control Z. My image just rotated. What did I just do? I have no idea how I just did that. Let me. Okay, what happened here? Layer image, image size, image rotation, trim, crop, duplicate. You know what? I can live with it for right now, I think. Can I? Okay. There we go. Wacom tablet's doing weird things. Let me go back over here. That selection again. Crank that in. Select that. Come back over here. Go back over my layer mask. Control H. Hide it. My paintbrush is really small now. You can't see it, but one way to see what's about to happen, we can go like this and click Alt. We can see how this is now what the program sees. And now what I can do is I can paint in between these little areas. And if you notice, here I can do a higher. So you can see how it's not selecting the actual leaves itself. It's actually selecting just the sky. And so now I've got a really fine-tuned selection of the sky. And so I can go through and edit around these irritating things like Joshua tree arms. And if you've ever edited around a Joshua tree, they are the biggest pain in the butt in all the world because they have all these little spiky leaves that make it really difficult to get really proper selections. And actually, while I'm here, we can talk about doing advanced selections too. Luminosity masks is a good way, but there's other couple ways to do this. So now I've gone through, I can go around and paint around all of my trees. And I can have a better sky now right around here. So let's go back. And so now I've blended overexposed or an underexposed sky with a properly exposed ground. And so now this looks fairly natural. So that is your introduction into luminosity masking and what they can do. But that's not all they can do. Before we go any further, does anybody have any questions?
So it's a random question, Nathan, and I apologize.
No, go for it.
But when you zoomed in onto the Joshua tree,
Mm-hmm.
in between the two main parts is a little tree back in the distance that to me, that one is just so, I would want to get rid of it. And I'm wondering if that's just me.
You can get rid of it. To get rid of it, you go to your sky layer, because that's the layer where it's going to be in. And you can go, let me get that out of the way. And you can go over here to, brush healing. You can click on this, make it cycle layer, brush size. You can go like this. Now, so find source of point used to say this one, and you go like this. So it's going to be in all the other layers down below too. So we can take care of that at the end. Let's worry about that one at the very end.
Again, it might just be me, but to me, it's a distraction. It looks like Mickey Mouse ears on a post.
That's what I've been
It's a
thinking the
Joshua
whole
tree
time
thing.
too.
Yeah. And you know what? If you don't want it, the way you get rid of that at the very end is you merge and have one final master layer, and then you get rid of it at the end. That's something you take care of at the very last moment. Does that make sense?
It does. I just wondered if anybody else's eye was drawn to it, or it was just me and I was getting distracted with the squirrel.
I didn't bother me, but I wasn't, I'm teaching right now, so I'm not usually too concerned about itty bitty tiny things like that when I'm doing kind of these broader ideas. So now let's talk about the other things luminosity masking can do. Generally speaking, when I do my editing, I usually do one kind of broad adjustment here using my levels, because then I can really brighten up the image by quite a bit. And after, before, and so now I have a nice bright image to work on. Right, at the very end of the day, people like bright images on their walls. I don't care who you are, your dramatic, dark, and moody images might look dramatic, dark, and moody, but when it comes to printing them on the wall, they turn them into a giant dark blotch of there. No matter how pretty they look on the screen, they do not translate well into a good wall picture unless you do a crap ton of work and brighten them up. But dark, moody images do not look well on walls. I'm going to say that right now and put my foot down. I can think of a lot of great photographers who I love their dark, dramatic, moody stuff. At the end of the day, when you print something dark, it will look bad. So now let's get back over here to the luminosity mask. So let's say I want to make my cactus here pop out more. So there's a couple ways I can do this. I can just make a layer, take a paintbrush, I can take white, boom, and then I can paint. And, let me just do this, and I'm going to go to overlay, because now it'll just, I can paint over all of this, and it will select everything, and I can make this here white, right? But that's a really crude way of selecting things. So you're like, oh, what if I just want the needles to be brighter and nothing else? So now we create another layer. We go back over here to our luminosity. And now I just have the needles. I want to just make it so the needles are the things I'm primarily affecting. These little rocks are going to happen too, but since I'm not going to color on them, I am now just focusing on the needles. And so I want to just edit these things right here. So with the luminosity masking, you can go through, choose your white layer, do some adjustments with this panel. Other panels do different things. If you're using the cheaper version, you can choose the different brightness levels, and then you go from there. And then what I would do from here, so now I have a luminosity. I'm going to go back over here to channels, go back to my modified area. I'm going to push my control, select, come back over here. I can create a layer or create a mask that now has this thing. So this layer is now locked into that mask. I go over here, click on the main layer that I'm editing, and then I push overlay. And now I can edit come on. Oh, Photoshop does this sometimes. It will not want to adjust the size of the paintbrush. Click on something else and click back, and it'll work again. It's a bug within the system. I've heard other photographers complain about it too. If it happens to you, that's what it is. So now I can paint, and if you do see here how just the needles are getting brighter, And so now when I'm doing my editing, I have just made a way for me to take my Joshua tree and make it look a little bit more alive. Or not my Joshua, my Cholla, my jumping cactus here. I took it from dark to light. And now it draws your attention quite vibrantly, right? But there's a problem with this. Now I have this bright thing on the bottom left side that's really drawing my attention, but I'm not focusing so much on this bright, pretty cloud up here. So let's make this cloud stand out a little bit more. So let's create a new layer. I'm going to now work on my shadows. And so remember, white is revealed, black is concealed. And so I want a little bit more of my darker area, the sky, maybe see if I can get a better mid-tone selection here. So now I have some shadows up here in the sky selected. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back over here to my rapid mask, control, click, and let's put that back over here. And I'm going to make this dark because now I am dodging and burning essentially. And I can take that same paintbrush and I can paint the shadows. This is a real crude way of doing it. I can adjust this. And I can make, something that's bright in the sky stand out. So let me control Z that one. Let's do that a little bit more subtly. So I want, my sky right here to stand out a little bit more. So let me go back over here. I'm going to paint in and make the dark areas a little darker. It's a little bit more subtle now, and I still feel like that's probably too much. So I can go back on my layers, hop back. And so still a little bit too much. Let's make this a little bit softer. So something around a 9. And I want to just darken that up, darken that up, darken that up. So now my cloud, without actually having to touch my cloud, I've made my cloud stand out a little bit more, and I can go up here and I can darken that up a little bit. So now cloud has a little bit, but now let's actually do one more thing. Let's go back over here to this layer. Remember, it selected all of these kind of dark or light patches in between. So let's actually do some subtle trickery here. So let's control hide this. So we're back over here. Now let's switch this back over to white. Then this is where you can start doing some real subtle trickery in your Photoshop editing to draw people's attention to where you want to go. So let's say we want to draw our people's attention back over here to the far right. So I can start going through and painting the very tops of these branches. Let me turn that up so you can see a little bit harder. I can start making the bright things within this image a little bit brighter. And I can make these mountains over here a little bit brighter. And I can do this, I can start adding a small line of light to the landscape that can draw people's attention over here. And then in the same way, I can flip that around and I can start darkening other bright things. Let me go back. Let's do another layer so you can see this a little better. So let's do this. And new layer. Okay. Control hide. So let's say I want to draw people's attention over here to the right. I can start painting, really clumsily here, some bright things over here to draw the eye back over into this direction. But I want to draw people's attention away from over here on the far left side. I can now start darkening things over here. And so this is a really rough version of that. But just like that, I now created something that naturally draws your attention over here to the right by creating bright bushes over here. And I took away your attention over here from the left. Let me zoom out a little bit more. And now you look at the image and you feel like this natural pull. And I can even make this and exaggerate this a little bit more. I can darken these ones around it. And so now I have literally a line of light painted back into the distance that goes this way. And I have a bright line that takes you back over here to the Joshua tree. And now let's brighten up my Joshua tree branches. I can come up over here, brighten these up. And now I can draw your attention to the parts of the image I want you to see and pay attention to. So that becomes the power of luminosity masking. You can do small fine-tune adjusting within your image to then draw your viewer's attention from, you know, bottom here up to the sky, back over here, and you create a triangle of light points that allows the viewer to look around, and you take their view away from these other darker areas, because people will look naturally away from the darker areas and find the lighter areas. And so that's where the magic of luminosity masking comes in. If you feel like you need to, you know, draw somebody through an image, you can do that. And if you want, I have one good example of it that's super subtle that I can pull up real quick, and then you can see how I did it. Let me pull that up, because it's actually a really good example of an image that you may not realize that I did it, but if you look at it and pay attention to it, it is a good example of one. So let me do this. Any questions while I look up this image?
Nathan, when you're all done, will you be able to show us the before and after picture so we have that contrast?
Yes. Fine, it's not here. Let's go to my book. Yep. So and if you want, you can do a quick version of that. We can go like this. You know, before we did all the adjustments, after we did all the adjustments. And these are, you know, rushed and janky adjustments. If I was really doing this and wanting to do it well, I would spend my time making sure I adjust the needles over here and work on the needles over here and work on these right over here. And I would really make sure your eyes were naturally drawn, and I wouldn't do such a harsh darkening over here on these light side. And so when you do it right, it becomes this subtle thing that you don't quite realize is happening. So this is here, I'll just throw this in front. So this is a good example of an image that has a good luminosity mask that you don't recognize that might be there. But if you pay close enough attention, let me go like this, you can see how I did it. So when I did this image, I wanted to feel like you were drawn from left to right across this image. And so what I did, I purposely darkened all of these leaves back here just subtly, but then these ones right here that are kind of flipped over lightened to just this leaf, this leaf, this leaf, this kind of curl around that then takes you up here to the top right, and this final leaf over here. So if you look at it, there's almost this natural S curve that moves across the image. And that's done with luminosity mask, where you can just carefully select the brightest layer and just work on that, and then work on your shadows and pull away your attention from like this right over here in the bottom left corner, and really make these small areas that you don't want them to pay active attention to. And so then you almost get this 3D effect where these leaves actually pop up just a little bit while everything else settles back into the background. So this is a really good example of what a good luminosity mask does, where you may not even see it, but it's doing its work. Okay, so that is, I guess, my final thing. We go flip this around, do this, 2:3 original ratio, and then, because remember we did the focus stacking, and so we're going to have weird edges. So now we do that. Oh, my little bar here of zoom is blocking my pushing arrow. Okay, so now we have our final image that looks something like this. And when we started, we were just like that. And when we originally started, we only had this in focus. So now we focus stacked, brought that back in, brightened up the image, and then drew our eyes to our 3 different areas we want us to pay attention to and go to. So that is the introduction to luminosity masking and using that. Do you guys have any other questions? Do you want to see any other type of techniques that you've kind of wondered about, have heard about that no one's bothered to talk about?
I'm going to ask an odd one because I saw this the other day. Removing dust off of your image with luminosity masks.
Ooh, I've never done that, but I can get an idea of how you do that.
Okay.
Let's say you create a new layer and you have on this layer we have a dust spot like that, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if I would personally do this. This sounds like a really hard way of getting rid of a dust speck. What you essentially would do would come over here to your luminosity mask, and you would, let me do this, clear my sources, and then did that one more time. So now you have a dot that you can see.
Mhm.
And then you come over here, and if you could adjust that so you select more and more of that dot. And so for this case, it would be, black here. So you'd create another layer, switch it over here to, and then you go back over to the exact same point. Let me go back over here to you select your layer, Control H, hide it, and then you find it and then click and counteract it.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's how I would do it. Honestly, I would never consider that a good way of doing things. That would be like a Photoshop nitpick nightmare to try to overcome something. The moral of the story, photographers generally complain about smaller things than most general public do. So when you do something like that and you do have a dust speck, if you have too much of them and you're having to do too much work around to get around it, your photo's lost. I had that happen to me the other day. I took some photographs over there by Utah Lake, and I had so many bugs in the air. The sky just had black swirly lines everywhere. And I was like, oh, my image is ruined. I can't overcome the sheer volume of these things within it. So new share, we can stop share. So no, I wouldn't do that. That's how I would do it, but I think that would be a terrible way to go about and trying to remove specs. Any other questions? Okay. It seems like that might be the end of it. It's been 45 minutes, an hour. And I'm fully free if anyone wants to ask me questions. I don't have any problems with answering them. So if people have questions on a photo edit and what they want to see and how they want to, you're like, oh, I want to do this. How do I might go about doing that? Just message me. I have no problem with it. So yeah, if you have any questions, send them my way and I can turn the time back over to whoever wants to be in charge.
Well, whoever wants to be in charge, or whoever's been appointed to be in charge, it might not be the same thing.
Let's be appointed then.
Okay. Nathan, thank you. Right now my head's full and swimming, and I think that's why you didn't get a lot of questions, as we're still trying to absorb the water from the fire hydrant you just pointed at us. It does make me want to get in and do a little bit more editing because I do the dodging and the burning, but to quote you, I do it the ugly way. So I do want to get in and help refine that. So thank you for taking the time to teach us this. You're getting many thank yous in the comments, and I this was great. I knew Photoshop was powerful, but I've never understood how to harness all that power. So this is a challenge to get in and learn a little bit more. Anybody
Yeah.
else?
I'm glad being recorded. Thanks. One thing that I could recommend, so if you want, you can buy the TK Action Panel. I actually have a little coupon code floating around somewhere. If you're feeling it, I can let me see where that. I actually have a thing you can get a discount. So before I walk away here, let me pull that up. Might as well share that.
The other thing I might ask Nathan is that every once in a while you share a before and after picture with your editing and keep challenging us.
Okay, so if you, I'll do that. So over here in the messages, if you go to the chat button, and SAP 15 will give you 15% off if you want to buy Tony Kuiper luminosity mask, which is what I use. So this is so that's who I use. You can use the free one. The free one works. The advanced one works a lot bit better. It just makes your life easier. I kind of wished I had done it a long time ago. It would have made my life easier. I don't use all the advanced settings you can do on it. Some people are far more willing to bother to fiddle with that. I don't care that much. So I primarily use it for the luminosity selection, but you can do color selections and all sorts of other different, types of things that make it even better and more powerful than what I do it. But yeah, I kind of like doing this before and after sharing, or go through my thought process how a photo got edited, because you usually don't see that from photographers. But when you actually see how a photo, really the magic photography when you're doing it right is these small slight changes that add up over time that build into this like crescendo that it's you may not realize is actually going on, but there's a bunch of small tweaks throughout the image that when you use luminosity masks, it's just so much easier to do.
Okay, anybody else have any questions for Nathan? Are you still drinking from the fire hose also? Okay, Jason, when you can, if you can put a post on the page to point us to where this was recorded, so we can go back and have a refresher course.
Yes, I will. I can do that.
Okay, then everyone have a great night and keep shooting and keep sharing.
Okay.
And we'll
Thanks
see
everyone for letting me do this.
No, thank
Thank
you.
you.
for being willing, Nathan.
Yep. Thanks for sharing.
Like I said, if you have any questions, just send them my way.